Hi Claire, this is the feedback for your mock exam that you completed just before Christmas. So if we look at question 1, you scored the full 4 marks for this question, so that's a good start. And if we move on to question 2 now, where you are asked to write a summary of the differences between Eddie and Henry. You start off making some good points. You see that Eddie seems to do well in school. He's quick to point out that his dad's less qualified than he is. He can't answer the questions that Eddie can. And Eddie spends his time playing games on the computer with his friends and can mock his dad once in a while. You go on to explain that Henry lives away from his father and he's writing to his father. And his father disapproves of his education as he comments on the fact that he's misspelling words that he knew when he was at home. He said that Henry seems respectful and open to his father and is in need of praise. And this bit here is not really relevant to the question because it's not dealing with the differences between Eddie and Henry themselves. So if we look at the mark scheme for this question, if we start off at level 1, and it says show some simple awareness from one or both texts, when you have clearly looked at both texts. And then the first bullet point says offers paraphrase rather than inference. And you do seem to have paraphrased both texts, which means you've taken the text and put it into your own words rather than read between the lines and written about what the writer's suggesting. For example, when Eddie's dad's talking about Eddie's results from his maths test where he got 20 out of 25 or 80%, he says Eddie doesn't labour the point, but he's irritatingly good at it. So the use of irritatingly suggests that his dad thinks Eddie finds it all very easy. He doesn't have to work hard at it. It just comes naturally to him. Whereas Henry seems to have to work hard at what he does, and the father does comment on the fact that he's misspelled some of the words in the letter, so his education seems to be going backwards somewhat. Going back to the mark scheme, the second bullet point says makes simple reference or gives textual details from one or both texts. Unfortunately, you've not done this either. You've not included any actual quotes from either of the texts, which is crucial to gaining the high marks in all of these questions. You must use direct quotes from the texts. And then statements to show simple differences between the texts. Well, you have included that one. So unfortunately, I think we can only give you 1 out of the 8 marks for this question. There are lots of differences that you could have used. For example, Eddie's a typical contemporary teenager who lives at home. He's basically in the lap of luxury. He's got his family, his friends, his computer. He can basically do what he wants and he doesn't seem to realise how lucky he is. That would be your inference. Whereas Henry's living in a different century, away at boarding school, isolated from his friends and his family. Eddie talks informally to his dad. He mocks him, makes fun of him, which shows that he's got a good relationship, a loving relationship with his dad. There's your inference again. Whereas Henry's polite and formal, which could suggest that he's a little bit scared of his dad as well. Your inference. Eddie asks his father for help in his English, whereas Henry asks him to bring him home. So there are lots of things that you could have used. So you need to make sure that you're using the actual quotes from the text to back up your points, and that you're using the inference showing that you're reading between the lines, not just paraphrasing what the writers have said themselves in the documents. Moving on to question 3, where you're asked to analyse the language that Henry uses to try to influence his father. You started off with the statement Henry shows his feelings towards his father straight away when he says, and then you've given a very long quote which is talking about the fact that there's no letter for him, which made him very unhappy. And if you reflect, I promised I would write you a sly letter, which I've not forgotten. Now the opportunity has come at last. You've not actually said what those feelings are. You need to elaborate on that and analyse. So you could say in there it's the word unhappy that tells you how he's feeling. So he's used the adjective unhappy. You could also say he's used the adjective sly to emphasise that everything's got to be done secretly. You go on to say he shows nervousness when he asks his father not to let Mr. Smith see the content of the letter. But you've paraphrased that one. You've not put it as a direct quote. You've just kind of put it in your own words. But again, it's not really explaining how he's trying to influence his father. What's he trying to get his father to understand from that, or what's he trying to get his father to do? Moving on, he then says he shows he misses his father by mentioning it's now 2 years come October since I left you at Islington, but I hope, my dear father, you will let me come home at Christmas, that we may once more meet again alive, if God permits it, me to live as long. So again, it's a very long quote, but all you've said about it is that it shows he misses him. You need to be putting more detail in, less quote and more detail. Yeah. You could have said he uses repetition of my dear father repeatedly throughout the letter, which could be trying to emphasise how close he feels to his dad and how much he misses him and how homesick he is. Or a higher level skill would be that it could be a deliberate ploy by Henry, using the word dear, because the fact that they've not seen each other for 2 years would suggest that the relationship's not all that close. So it could be that he's trying to be a bit sneaky by using the word dear to get round his father and butter him up so that he will let him come home. You could also say here, where may once again meet again alive, if God permits it. It could be classed as hyperbole, over exaggeration, where he's using it, or emotive language, where he's trying to make his dad feel guilty, or pulling at his heartstrings, suggesting that if he doesn't see him soon, then he might not see him again because he's likely to die in that place. And then finally, you've mentioned that he uses a simile, which is good. And you've used it appropriately. I assure you that we are more like bears than Christians. But again, you've not said how that is trying to influence the father. You could have gone on to say that he's trying to emphasise how badly they're being treated there. And overall, the main purpose of the letter is to persuade his dad to let him come home. And you've not really put that point across. So looking at the mark scheme, I think we've got to stick to level 1 for this question, which says, shows simple awareness of language, offers simple comment on the effects of language. Again, it is only simple comments that you've made. He shows he misses his father. He shows his nervousness, shows his feelings. That is just simple comment, and not commenting on the effect of the language. Select simple references or textual details. You have chosen some quotes, several quotes, but they're overlong. We need to look at you shortening them and just picking out the bits or zooming in on particular words. So we'll do some of that over the next few weeks, and make simple use of subject terminology. It says not always appropriate, but the terminology that you've used has been used appropriately. You just need to use more. In fact, you've only really used one, which is the simile here. So again, you need to practice using more subject terminology to get you up the band. So I think it's got to be 3 marks out of the possible 12 for that question. Moving on to question 4, where you're asked to compare how the two writers convey their different attitudes to parenting and education, and you're asked to compare the different attitudes, compare the methods they use to convey their attitudes, and support your ideas with references to both texts. Unfortunately, I'm not sure you've quite understood what you are being asked to do here, because again, really, you've just paraphrased or rewritten quotes from the text rather than explaining what the different attitudes and perspectives are, how they view parenting, how they do it, how they look at education. For example, you could have talked about the fact that Eddie's dad, Jay, seems to be a lot more relaxed and informal, but involved in the parenting of Eddie. You know, he tries to help him with his homework. He has a go at doing the maths test. As you said, he doesn't do very well, and he's humiliated in a joking way by his son. Whereas Henry's dad it's more distant and formal because they've actually been sent away to boarding school. Jay Rayner's attitude seems to be that education is better now than it was when he was at school, because Eddie seems to be doing so much better than he did. He's actually quite proud of the way Eddie's doing. He comments on the fact that the 80% is low for Eddie. He says he's irritatingly good at it, so it seems to come naturally to him. Henry's father seems disappointed. I mean, you have actually picked up on the quote that he's upset, which says, "I do not approve of the system of education," when it goes on to talk about the fact that they were able to spell before they went to school, and he's noticed 2 spelling mistakes in there. So it's that kind of thing that you need to be looking at for this question. It's not just rehashing what the authors have said, it's picking up on what their attitudes are towards it. With regard to the attitudes towards parenting, again, Eddie's dad seems to be quite informal and they have a good jokey relationship, whereas Henry's dad is very cool. You also need to make reference to the methods that the writers have used to get the points across. So you could say that Jay, Eddie's dad, uses humour a lot throughout his article. Was on the spot, I couldn't think of a single metaphor worth dragging out and slapping on the table, so he uses informal language and humour, irony. This I used to be able to do, or at least I think I used to be able to do it, or in his special mocking way. So it's all about the humour and the mocking, whereas Henry's dad writes to the family friend in a very formal, impersonal way. So I think we can only get 2 out of the possible 16 marks for this question. This gives you a score of 10 out of 40 for this mock exam, but bear in mind that it's the first time that we've done one of these mock exams for paper 2, and we've got 5 months now to work towards both exam papers. So there's everything still to play for, and I can see some good things in what you've done. You just need to spend more time developing your skills and making sure that you know how to answer each individual question. So keep up the good work. You're attending well. Just make sure that you're doing all your homeworks and handing them in, because doing your homework is crucial to me knowing how you're getting on, and also you knowing what you need to work on.